All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar sponsored by ADRF. Please note this session is being recorded and the recorded session will be available after the webinar. Everyone will be on mute, but you can submit your questions anytime in the question box located on the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer your questions throughout the webinar. So as many of you guys are still experiencing some travel restrictions with COVID-19, we've been hearing some feedbacks from our customers and partners that they're looking for a better way to network and connect with peers in our industry. They were also looking for more interesting news and discussion. So we took a little different approach for this webinar to deliver more meaningful contents. And the format of the webinar will be also different, as it will be more interactive and consists with series of questions and answers as if we're talking at a trade show. All right. Now let me introduce you to our speakers today. We have 4 speakers: Dennis Burns, Director of Public Safety at ADRF; Kern Davis, VP of Business Development at Communication Technology Services, CTS. We also have Gabe Adams, a manager for densification business development at RFS, and Marty Eck, a sales manager at Windy City Wire. We originally invited James Bowens from Windy City Wire, but unfortunately he wasn't able to join us today, but thankfully, Marty was kind enough to fill in for James. So thank you, Marty. We also have John Foley, a managing director from Safer Building Coalition, who's waving at us, who'll be moderating the discussion today. So thank you, gentlemen, for taking your time this morning to share your insights with everyone. And now I'll hand it off to John.
Thank you, Siri, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm John Foley, the Managing Director of the Safer Buildings Coalition. We have a great panel and a great set of topics to talk about today. The Safer Buildings Coalition is a nonprofit 501c4 organization, independent, and our mission is to solve for the problem of in-building wireless dead zones. You can visit us at saferbuildings.org, but let's get started right from the top. So just to get to know a little bit about who you are in the audience, we have a couple of polling questions that Siri is going to pop up on the screen for us. First, we'd like to know a little bit about what best describes your organization. So the poll is now up on the screen. Just click one of those and click submit. And we will, that'll help us understand who we have out there. It looks like we have well over 135 people already on. And just giving that a minute. So in the meantime, Dennis, can you tell us a little bit about, in 30 seconds or less, your role with ADRF?
Sure, John, thanks. And thank you everyone for attending our webinar today. So yeah, Dennis Burns, Director of Public Safety. My role within the organization is really making sure that the public safety products that we have today comply with what the AHJ requirements are out there across the country. So I work closely with a lot of the AHJs to make sure we have what they need today, as well as understanding what their requirements are going to be for the future, so that our customers, our integrators, have the products that are needed out there in the industry.
Thank you, Dennis. Siri, do we have a result yet on poll number 1? Okay, so the majority of the attendees are system integrators. I'm one of the others, being from a nonprofit. Another is listed as 17% is manufacturing. So the folks that are doing the design, installation, and trying to solve for the challenges is the majority of our audience. We'll make sure, though, that we talk to everyone. Thank you. Can you launch poll question number 2, Siri, please, which is what is the one thing that you want to get out of this webinar? So whichever one of these best describes why you came, why you registered, what you hope to hear. And with that up on the screen, let's go to Marty Eck. Marty, what is your role within Windy City Wire?
Thanks a lot, John. I'm one of the sales managers here, and we are a manufacturer and a stocking distributor of both ADRF and RFS products. And we're excited to be here and try and be a part of this conversation and bring some value to it where we can.
Thank you very much. And Dennis, or excuse me, Gabe, your role at RFS.
Thank you, John. Many folks know RFS as, we build our passives, we have our coax, and now we've got our dragon skin. So we built a very strong ecosystem with our integrator partners, our distribution partners like Windy City, and of course working with the SBC, and just getting out and educating integrators or enterprise owners on public safety. So that's what I do, and I work with our internal teams to ensure that they have all the tools they need.
Thank you, appreciate that. Siri, can you put up the results of poll question 2, please? So almost tied for first place, or get the latest information for public safety code, and here are the common challenges with public safety deployments. That's great. That's very, very helpful. I appreciate that. And with that, Kern, your role at CTS.
Oh, hey, John, and thank you to our ARDF for inviting me to be a part of this, or ADRF, excuse me. So, yeah, my role is business development, which really was strongly focused for the last several years on public safety. But I also look at integrating that, as an integrator would, into all of the different wireless services that are becoming more and more prominent in enterprise installations. So it goes beyond just public safety into commercial cellular and everything else, but we have an extremely strong focus on public safety at this point. And we've been out, as you know, John, delivering the message in form of public safety training and so forth across the nation.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So Siri, if you would go ahead and put up your first slide. The first question being, what are the recent planned code updates for NFPA, ISC, UL, and local amendments? I'm actually going to go ahead and share. Oh, I guess I can't. That's okay. I'm going to set the table a little bit here and tell you that the codes and standards that are most relevant to this space are in, depending on the state that you live in, are the ICC codes, the International Fire Code, with majority of this topic being in section 510. And also in the International Code Council's ICC is the International Business Code, where the language will be found in section 918. Next, you have the NFPA. The NFPA has NFPA 1 and 101 that talk about more generically what the public safety requirements are. And then you have NFPA 72, which is the fire alarm and signaling code. And then starting in 2016, the requirements for in-building boosters moved to 1221. But let's not forget NFPA 70, which is the National Electric Code. After that, you have the FCC Part 90 rules and Part 20 rules for cellular. You have state local amendments. And then you have standards and listings from organizations like Underwriters Laboratory, TIA, and ANSI. So let's start with you, Dennis. You're as some of you may know, Dennis is on the board of directors of the Safer Buildings Coalition and participates in the Codes and Standards Work Group. Dennis, what are some of the things that are going on right now in the codes and standards world that should be important to know for the audience?
Yeah, thank you, John. Yes, as John mentioned, I am a part of the Codes and Standards Work Group for Safer Buildings, as well as the UL 2524 Work Group Committee. And some of the things that are going on right now, there is a consolidation effort that is currently happening with what's referred to as NFPA 1225. So 1221 and 1060 will become 1225. And the first revision of that was approved in May of this year. And then we're going to be moving to a comment phase, which will those comments will be due back in October, and then there's a session that will take place virtually in November as that as that committee gets back together again to talk about some of these changes and enhancements to the code. And one of the things that's going to be in NFPA 1225 is what's referred to as UL 2524. We'll talk about that a little bit more in this during this session. But that's a standard that was approved by the Standards Technical Panel in 2018 with a revision in early 2019. All about making these emergency responder communication enhancement systems more safe as they complete them. But also just to address some of the local requirements that are changing. One of the things that I really want to stress here is that if you're a system integrator and you're putting a system into a local jurisdiction, you always want to check in with the AHJ, right? You want to understand, what code year are they working towards? Is it IFC 2018? Is it 2015? What code year of NFPA? Because you want to make sure that the system that you design and put in place, it does adhere to those requirements, because the different code years do make a difference. One thing that's changing on the West Coast is you now have needs for the monitoring of passive components. So that's something that's changing up in California on the West Coast. You have some AHJs now on the West Coast as well as in the DC market that require the what's referred to as an EPO, right? The ability to turn off the BDA so that it stops generating noise into the macro network. So that's a few things that are happening, but like I mentioned, always want to check in with the AHJ first to make sure that the system that you are designing and going to ultimately deploy meets their requirements.
Thank you, Dennis. Appreciate that. We're having a little trouble with your audio there, so we'll communicate to you through chat if we continue to have problems. Thank you very much. So we're going to talk a little bit about the 2 or 3 predominant areas where the public safety, fire and building codes and standards are most relevant to this industry. And those are going to be the codes and standards that focus on on the passive side, pathway survivability. In there, you would have topics like whether or not the cable is physically protected and the passives are physically protected. We'll talk about that. We're going to talk about fire ratings and where they apply, and what sections of these systems need to be protected by a fire rating. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And we're also going to talk about some of the codes that pertain to the active components of these systems, predominantly the enclosures that they're placed in, and the standards that are applied to them, which would be the UL 2524 standard. So just to get things kicked off, let's go to the next slide, Siri, and where we're going to tee up the next question, right? Which is, what is UL 2524 and why is it important to everyone? And I'm going to start there with Kern. Kern, why is UL 2524 important to everyone? What is it? And why do AHJs want listed equipment? What's so good about listed equipment? And what is UL 2524? You're on mute, Kern.
Please excuse me. I'm going to start with kind of tagging on to what Dennis was just saying about finding out what the AHJs are looking for. We ran around the country for the last 2 years working with AHJ for them to understand these codes better and what the requirements are. And what we saw universally was that, they've got a lot on their plate to go out and inspect and look at, and learning what the best equipment is and being an equipment expert, an OEM expert, is not something that they wanted on their plate. Having a standard like UL 2524, which really defines what the correct requirements would be for any electronic equipment that is being developed, be it right now, I think the big focus is repeaters and annunciators, battery backup systems. I know it's going to move on to also the fiber systems and the electronics involved in that. but it really is a standard that defines what the requirements of the performance would be, as well as the actual build of the product from a safety standpoint, as well as a durability standpoint, even through the fire events. So, and reliability standpoint. And so this has really met a terrific need that for the AHJs to be able to rely upon that. Additionally, as a building owner or an integrator, it really helps us narrow down and focus in on the pieces of equipment that we know are going to be acceptable. I see that as being the biggest focus right now.
So Marty, can you talk a little bit about UL 2524 and listed product in general? Marty, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Well, we know that the products that we're supplying that are the UL 2524 listed are, go in conjunction with the cabling that we supply as well. So I'm not, John, I apologize. I'm not really sure how I'm supposed to expand upon that.
That's okay, my bad. Dennis, talk a little bit about specifically what 2524 is.
Absolutely. So, and hopefully I switched to a to a wired mic, so hopefully I'm sounding a little better now versus the digital version of me. But yeah, with UL 2524, it's a variety of standards that are all kind of coming together to make systems safer. You are certifying as a system, taking the the BDA repeater, the enunciator, which the enunciator does is required for both visual and audible, as well as the battery backup piece. And it's it's looking at the enclosures, to make sure that they pass corrosion testing with UL 50E. It's also looking at, as Kern mentioned, there's a number of tests regarding performance and operational tests that you must complete and pass. There's ambient temperature testing. So it's a whole litany of tests that you must pass according to the UL 2524 standard. It's all spelled out in that document, and it's something that we as an organization. ADRF is currently, classified for UL 2524 fire and shock, and we're in the final stages of going through the UL certification process to become 2524 listed, and something that I work with the UL team on a daily basis, going through all of the different test setups and ensuring that everything is going to pass, so that when the system is actually deployed, it's going to work in the means that it was designed, so that when the first responders enter the building, the system does operate appropriately.
Thank you. And for our audience, if you look at the bottom of your window, you're going to see a button that says Q&A. The panel is monitoring the questions, and if you have questions, feel free to submit them at any time. We may answer them right during the subject, or we may hold them to the end. There is a Q&A section, so please do take advantage of the Q&A section at the bottom. Excellent. So Siri, would you mind going to the next slide for the next topic? And the question is, what are the problems and challenges with fire rating and pathway? And so, Gabe, talk to me a little bit about fire rating. What are we talking about when we talk about fire rating, and what elements of an in-building public safety system need to be protected from fire?
Let me get off mute, but that, of course, John, and as well as I do, the code spells out a lot for us, but there's also local addendums that need to be taken into consideration. Just like Dennis was saying earlier, it's always great to first get in touch with your local AHJ and understand. But when you're looking at NFPA, even for instance, 1221 and 5.5.1.1, and it specifically says, the requirement of circuit integrity being protected and being UL listed. And of course, so when you're looking at that, there's several different ways you can do that. You can wrap it. You can put it into different types of conduit, then wrap it, or whatever it may be. But and then also having your equipment in a 2-hour rated room. So there's definitely challenges as you're looking to pull your cables through to hang your passives in that building to protect them as best you can in order to achieve, a 2-hour rating for that building.
Excellent, thank you. So, among the different solutions that are available to get fire rating on a cable running through the building, Kern, what are some of the options? You're muted, Kern.
Gosh, I got to quit doing that. I spend a lot of my time, it's a great question. I spend a lot of time talking around the United States to our different project managers as they're working with the AHJs around the country. If it's a new building and we are involved early enough in that new building, then we want to talk to the architects and make sure that they're designing 2-hour rated vertical chases. If they design that way, it's not that much more expensive. Then we've saved them a lot of money and created a path that doesn't cost them an arm and a leg later on if they miss that. The second part of it is in a new construction scenario is if we have to go horizontally, we can get some conduit buried in a concrete slab, and that doesn't cost a lot either, and it certainly saves a lot of extra costs at a later date. If it's an existing building though, or if they miss some of these, then all too often we find that we've got to go to a more expensive product. Certainly the fire rated cable that I'm going to do this again, RFS has available for us. We will reach to that, and it overcomes a lot of those challenges, or frequently we've in the past had to wrap it with the 3M fire wrap. It was a very expensive solution at that point in time. And I will not rule out the fact that every once in a while we've gotten a hold of an AHJ and started to talk a little about the new code and maybe talk them off that ledge with the older year into the newer year and get them to understand what the spirit of that new code is. So, we've had success on every one of those venues or every one of those avenues.
And John, just one thing I'd add to that is, with one of the challenges, in achieving the 2-hour rating is human error, right? And so that's one of the things that's why the code asks, for a UL listed product, because it eliminates most of that human error out of achieving 2-hour rating. So that's just one of the things that Dragon Skin does. So
appreciate that. Thank you. So this is obviously a deep topic, and pathway survivability comprises not just fire rating, but also mechanical protection. I'm going to move to that in a second, but just a couple of quick things. First of all, there are a couple of questions that came up referring back to UL 2524. I'm gonna ask you guys to put a save the date on your calendars for Thursday, July the 16th. The Safer Buildings Coalition will be doing a webinar with OSHA, which operates the NERDL program, as well as with 2 prominent nationally recognized testing laboratories, specifically to talk about UL 2524. You'll be seeing an announcement coming out this week on that, and we'll go deeper. But the specific questions that were asked were, 1, will passive components ever be required to have UL 2524 certification? UL 2524 is a brand new standard. It was only received ANSI approval in October of 2018. That discussion is underway. It doesn't currently cover passive, it currently only covers active. The other question was, is UL 2524 fire and shock, or is that UL 60950? And UL 2524 does consider enclosures, protection from fire and shock, as might be discussed in UL 50, for example. But it's a suitable for the purpose type. Is the system or the assembly suitable for the purpose is really the key function of 2524. And so a question has come up about dragon skin and whether it's been approved by all AHJs. This is a 60-minute webinar of which we've gotten 25 minutes into. Let me just see by a show of hands among all of our panelists, I'm assuming that our viewers can see them. How many of you agree that all the AHJs across the country absolutely interpret everything the same way and agree on everything?
Oh, no, no.
Okay.
Nice
The real
thought.
issue is comes down to frequently what version of code is enforced. For example, NFPA 1221/2016 and prior NFPA 72 require pathway survivability, and most jurisdictions are still using those versions. So you need to solve for pathway survivability, whereas NFPA 1221/2019 removed those requirements for the distribution, but still require fire rating on the backbone. The other would be a change that says that the fire rating must match that of the building. So if you're in a 2-hour building, you need 2-hour protection. But if you're in a 1-hour building, you need 1-hour protection. So those changes to codes come fast and hard. So Dennis, back to you real quick, and then I'm going to throw it over to Marty for a question about mechanical protection of cable. Who is the first authority that you try to identify when doing a project, either bidding a project in a jurisdiction or getting it tested? Who's the most important person you got to identify first?
The HJ. I mean,
And-
the HJ is, the authority having jurisdiction. So you need to make sure that the system you put in place meets their requirements. I mean, you want to, code year like we talked about, the HJ is going to be able to give you that information, so that they are the most critical initially.
And Kern, at the end of the day, who has the final decision on whether or not you can use or can't use fire rated cable or 3M wrap or 2-hour rated soffits, or whether you need fire rating at all? At the end of the day, who do you have to satisfy?
Hey, the answer is the AHJ. They are the beginning, the middle, and the end of the entire project. We've built over 9,000 DAS projects nationwide. You don't know, I'm here to tell you, you don't know what your scope is, and you don't know what's going to be approved at the end of the day unless you've got that AHJ understanding.
And I've even had 2 different inspectors in the same jurisdiction give different interpretations. So it really comes down to the inspector that you have on the project. So Marty, coming back to you here. So we talked about fire rating on cable, but the other component of pathway survivability is mechanical protection. And depending on the version of the code, different code years talk about metallic raceway. Newer versions of the code talk about metal armored cable. What exactly is metal armored cable, and what's the difference between that and metallic raceway?
So, thanks, John. The difference between how we've interpreted code and gone and created a product is, flexible armored product is different than metallic raceway because you have hard fixed DMT would be considered, a fixed metallic raceway, whereas creating a flexible armor over the jacket of the cable allows you a lot of diversity and cost-effective functionality on the job. And working in conjunction with RFS, we have created a product that we think fits and provides level 1 survivability as an alternative to fixed DMT. Again, AHJ, and interpretation of how they feel about code per jurisdiction. But there is an alternative that's out there now that we've worked and helped, get into certain jurisdictions with integrators that, again, depending on how it's being interpreted and being, accepted, is providing mechanical protection to fix DMT at a more cost-effective and alternative fashion.
Thank you for that. We're getting some questions in because we're throwing some acronyms around, and I guess that happens in our industry. Someone is asking, who exactly is the AHJ? What is an AHJ? So an AHJ is the authority having jurisdiction. If you go look this up in NFPA, there's actually a definition, but the AHJ could be a person, an organization, or a group who are responsible for providing permission. It could be an electrical inspector, it could be a fire code inspector, it could be the FCC license holder. It could be anybody who's involved in the project that gets a say in whether or not your permit is issued or your or provides to you the specifications. So generally, it's more towards the fire code and the building code side, but some people expand that to include the license holder. And another question was, please clarify backbone elements of a BDA. The code, if you go into the NFPA code, it actually has definitions in NFPA 1221/2019. You can look those up. But, and by the way, if you don't have a copy of the code and you're in this business, you need to get a copy of the code. You can view these codes online. If you go to NFPA, if you create a login for yourself, you can view them for free. But do go ahead and look up the sections of code that define backbone and distribution. But generally, a backbone is a cable that carries signals that are important to the entire building, going from the donor antenna through the BDA and out to the antenna distribution lines. So if you think about that visually, that's very different than the runs that tap off of the backbone and go out to the antennas. That's the distribution. If you want, write me a note at john.foley@saferbuildings.org, and I'll send you a slide deck that examines that. Okay, moving on to the next question, Siri, which is, what are the common installation requirements for public safety deployments? Let's go ahead and put up poll question number 4, which is, what is your biggest obstacles, challenges with the public safety deployment? So while we're waiting for the answers to that one come in, I'm going to pick mine and submit it. Let's see. Gabe, starting with you, what are the common installation requirements for public safety deployment? So we've got 2 guys that focus on passive, one guy that focuses on active, and another one whose job it is to sort all this out and design it. So we'll start with the passive guys first. Gabe, what are the common installation requirements for public safety deployments with regard to the passive components of the system?
Yep. So, you know, when it comes to, for instance, the riser, right, it needs to be 2-hour rated for pathway survivability, and it's required to be UL listed. And so, you know, when it comes to that, there's several different ways you can do that, and whether or not that's wrapping it with 3M tape or using our dragon skin, or like what other folks had said earlier, putting into soffits. And then, for instance, you know, when you're deploying any type of, or if you're wrapping anything, a cable, or if you're deploying my dragon skin, it doesn't need to be wrapped. But the passives that connect it, the tappers, the splitters, the combiners, those do need to be wrapped. And so, you know, we work with a lot of integrators to get feedback, give feedback, some best practices, for instance, on where to place your splitters. Can you put them in the 2-hour raceway? That type of, you know, to overcome, you know, having to, you know, or keeping as much of your passives in a safe area as possible. So those are the type of things we see all the time. And then, you know, requirements in regards to physical protection. So when you're working with a metal clad like what Windy City brings, and being able to just pull that straight through a building without having to first load up conduit and then pull, you know, that helps in regards to the installation.
Thank you, Gabe. And just to be clear, where the transition happens from backbone to distribution through a coupler, those need to be in a fire rated enclosure that matches the rating of the building. So an enclosure. It could be a wrap, it could be a box, it could be a soffit, properly fire stopped. So there are lots of ways to do it. Fire codes are generally performance-based. Before I hand it over to Marty, Siri, can you post the results of the poll question, please? So this is not surprising. You know, variations in the public safety code requirements really have a big impact on the cost of a system, how you would bid the work correctly, and the scope. So not a shock there. And obviously the Safer Buildings Coalition, with the help of all of you as subject matter experts, in fact, everybody on this call are members, all the organizations represented on this call are all members of the Safer Buildings Coalition, and we're very grateful for that. We encourage you guys to join the Codes and Standards group. It'll help you keep up with public safety code requirements. So thank you for that. And Marty, from your perspective, common installation requirements on the passive side for public safety deployments. Why, you know, if my choices are metal raceway or armored cable, what are the implications of being able to use armored cable or armored metallic cable versus hire an electrician to put in conduit? What are the differences there in cost? What are the differences there in how long it takes to install, in permit, in ease of installation? Can you talk a little bit about the differences between the two?
Yeah, thanks, John. One of the things that we've seen when we worked with RFS and created the Smart Guard product, which is our version of a flexible metallic raceway, is, as you mentioned, you know, depending on where you're working, you know, you may have to bring in a second party, third party electrician, depending on the organization's acumen. And if they have to come in and install and bend conduit to provide the level 1 mechanical protection of the cable, you know, there's a tremendous cost associated with that. And then coming in and installing the cable behind it or through it. And talking with different integrators across the country, you know, different methodologies, different installation practices. One of the things we found that given the opportunity to present a flexible armored alternative in an installation can depending on the area of the country, it can be a you know, 25% of the cost of or greater, you know, than the armor, installing the conduit. So as an example, if someone's carrying $8 to $12 a foot to install, you know, cable through conduit in an area, you know, an alternative solution like we provide with RFS, you know, we can offer that at a tremendous cost savings. And, you know, as you mentioned, we're all members of the Safer Building Coalition, and part of the, you know, goal there is to, you know, give building owners the most cost-effective, code-efficient solution. And, you know, that's what we believe, you know, working with that our product and offering the flexible armored solution will do. And it's a clean, you know, if you're retrofitting in a building and you're trying to get from point A to point B and you have to run fixed conduit or fixed DMT, you could be really navigating through some, you know, a lot of already obstructions in that building. And you having an alternative like a flexible version is going to give you an opportunity to, you know, move from those points in a more cost-effective fashion. So that's where we see, as long as we're hitting the point of level 1 physical protection as an alternative, you know, we feel as though we're hitting the necessary point with the flexible armor.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So Kern, coming to you, we're getting some questions that are coming in, and then I'll go to Dennis to talk about the actives. So one of the questions was, do the current editions of fire code require flexible metal conduit to be UL listed? Do you know anything about how the AHJs are looking? And obviously, when you get into this, you could be jumping outside of NFPA 1221. I've seen code officials refer to NFPA 72. I've also seen them refer to NFPA 70, which is the National Electrical Code. What kinds of variations are you running into in the market where code officials are putting expectations on you around whether or not there's listed product or even whether flexible metal conduit is permitted on their projects?
So again, great question, because, and earlier we started talking about what does AHJ mean, and a lot of us instantly go to that fire marshal that we want to reach out to find out what their requirements are for the build from a fire code perspective. But we got to throw in a little side of the local building department and local building code too. You know, what do those code officials require? They do play into seismic bracing when you're putting racks down. Well, they also play into how you're going to install conduit and how you're going, what kind of flexible metal conduit you can use, or if you can use it. There are counties in the United States where flexible metal conduit is not allowed for anything, and we learned that the hard way. So it's very important to realize who all those players are. Probably one of the toughest jobs of an integrator is to identify all those AHJs, all those code officials, and find out all their requirements. So yes, UL listing is generally required, be it through the fire code or be it through, or fire marshal, I should say, AHJ. More frequently though, it's going to be the local building department and what they're going to require of you when you put this in.
And just to be clear, Marty, you know, your product, your flexible metal raceway product is pretty new. You have a manufacturing process that adds this armor protection to cable. Is there a UL listing on that particular product yet? Is that something you guys are in the process with? And what are some of the things that you know, from a mechanical protection, someone might be concerned about with regard to mechanical protection to a cable?
Well, to answer the question, as far as the UL listing, John, we're working with RFS to expand the listing on it. The cable itself is enclosed in the flexible armor that we have. That the armor has a UL listing itself. And as far as, you know, the requirements, I mean, mechanical protection is just that. You know, the crush resistance, does it meet the necessary crush requirements? And again, interpreted by each AHJ, and are we able to put it into a building and meet all the necessary things tied to physical protection, so, and level 1 survivability. That's the focus of the product. So
appreciate that, thank you. So moving over to Dennis. Dennis, what are some of the common installation requirements for public safety deployments on the active side?
Yes, thanks, John. So the, you know, a lot of it goes back to, again, to the, you know, the AHJ, understanding what their requirements are, the, you know, the FCC license holder, because on the active side, I mean, you know, first and foremost, you need to understand, well, you know, what frequencies, you know, do I need to cover? You know, so if I'm covering, you know, fire frequencies, EMS, you know, police, you know, exactly what frequencies are they using? Is it UHF, VHF, 700, 800, all of the above? So that's one of the things you want to know first and foremost, so that you know, you put the appropriate active system in place. But also understanding, you know, is it Class A or is it, you know, Class B, right? So you know, you need to know that up front, because some AHJs will only allow Class A. And you know, Class A, you know, typically, so that's a, you know, that's a channelized system. You know, the FCC, you know, defines that as 75 kilohertz and below. If it's above that, it's, you know, more of a wideband solution, which is, you know, Class B. And then, you know, understanding what the requirements are there, because if you are going to be deploying a Class B system, you know, you must register with the FCC, you know, using the FCC ID that's on the repeater box. And then again, understanding, you know, the way each AHJ, you know, deploys these systems. You know, if you're putting a system in you know, Orange County, California, you know, they have different cells that may require, you know, a 3 megahertz filter and a 6 megahertz filter. You can't put everything in one 10 megahertz filter. They won't allow it. So, you have to
Dennis, if I
understand.
could interrupt you for a second,
Sure.
you've been discussing quite a bit about the RF performance characteristics of the amplifiers that are used in these systems.
Yes.
And this brings up a really interesting bifurcation of responsibility, which has to do with what is the fire code and building code official responsible for and interested in versus what is the FCC license holder responsible and have authority over, right? And all of things that you've been discussing have been what are covered in NFPA 1221 section 9.6.14 called technical criteria, right?
Correct.
And the technical criteria includes frequencies required for the in-building enhancement system, the location and effective radiated power of the radio sites used by the public safety radio enhancement system, maximum propagation delay, obviously important for P25, list of specifically approved system components, and other supporting technical information necessary to direct system design. So what is the difference between the roles and the authorities of the FCC license holder, who is the only authority that has the authority to allow you to operate one of these systems, as opposed to the other aspects that are controlled by the fire code official, such as the type of enclosure, for example, for these active systems? Can you talk a little bit about those two entities? Because a lot of people talk about the fire code official, but almost nobody talks about the FCC license holder.
Yeah, sure. I can address that. In some cases, it could be the same, meaning like say for instance with the Office of Unified Communications in DC, they are the FCC license holder for their frequencies in 700 and 800 megahertz, as well as the the local AHJ for the requirements of the of the system itself. But the understanding the frequencies that are going to be communicated, and there's actually a good tool which on the Safer Buildings website, which goes directly to radio reference, so you can understand what are the frequencies for fire, police, EMS. If you're doing a system in New York, you need to know, hey, channel 11 and 12, 483, 484. So they both work very cooperatively, I guess you could say, because at the end of the day, the fire inspector is going to come into the building. They're going to do grid testing, and they're going to want to make sure that the system that you have deployed works on all of the frequencies that are required. They're going to walk around to all of the critical areas before they're going to sign off on the system for you to get a certificate of occupancy. So, it's the fire inspector, the FCC license holder, the AHJ, all of those elements are critical for you to deploy a system. And just adding one other thing regarding the active components, because it is also important, and that is, it's not just the repeater, right? When you look at the active piece, you also have the battery backup requirements, right? What are those requirements, so that is it 12 hours as a standalone? Is it 2 hours with a generator? And then behind the battery backup, you have the fire alarm control panel, and how the annunciator for those alarms works with the fire alarm control panel, because you need to understand that the annunciator must be mounted in close proximity to that control room. So all of those things are extremely important when you look at deploying an active system, and you need to make sure you're working with each of those folks: fire, FCC, AHJ, all of the above.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Couple of quick questions that are coming in. What's the difference between UL certification and UL listing? Does each system need to be registered on the FCC website? There have been some product-specific questions. I want to tell the audience, keep the questions coming. If we're not able to answer them live during the webinar, we will definitely get answers back to you directly, and particularly if you have product-specific questions, the vendors here can answer you directly. We've recorded all the questions. With respect to does each system need to be registered on the FCC website under FCC Part 90 rules? Only Class B amplifiers need to be registered with the FCC. However, right now, the Puget Sound Emergency Radio Network, PSERN, up in the state of Washington, is going through a tremendous problem right now as they upgrade to a new radio system. because it's an estimated 600 to 700 BDAs that have been installed up there over the last 15 years. And for the majority of them, they don't know where they are. So each jurisdiction needs to have a regime of recording where these systems are done. They should be issuing a license for rebroadcast, and the jurisdictions should be noting these. We think the FCC rules ought to be changed. All right, we're going to change gears a little bit here. We're coming up to the close here. We have 10 minutes left. We have 2 more topics left. I'm going to make the first one quick and the second one a little more time. The first is how has not the pandemic been impacting the supply chain? As a purchaser of lots of different components, Kern, have you seen much impact on the supply chain?
Not huge. It has slowed down a little. We are working to stay ahead of that, just in the planning mode of what is going on. However, the other side of that planning question then becomes, you know, do we know for certain when a start date is going to be, if we're going to be allowed on the project? How fast can the project move once you're there if you're working in an existing building? Certainly it's having its effect. But again, if we're looking forward, if we're planning, we're able to at least set different expectations and mitigate some of the problems.
Are there any projects that have been pulled in earlier because of taking advantage of empty buildings, or is everything getting pushed out, or is it about the same?
Actually have seen a little bit more activity in hospital world, where existing buildings, although that is an extremely challenging environment, it was before, it's worse now. But otherwise, no, most of the new construction stuff remains pretty much as is.
Thank you. And Dennis, I have 2 questions for you. Obviously, as an offshore manufacturer, there's a lot, you know, there are big oceans to cross, right? What challenges are you, not only for the supply chain of getting your product into the US, but also the different components and parts that you have to source to make your gear? Are there any impacts there? And knowing some of the projects that ADRF is involved in, have you seen any particular verticals where projects have been accelerated as a result of the pandemic? First question being supply chain.
Sure. Thank you, John. So yeah, I mean, we have not had a significant impact with supply chain. You know, Julie Song, our president, was very quick to react in March. So we we are manufactured in South Korea. You know, qualify for Buy American, obviously, but we're based in California, and one of the things that we did early on is we made sure that we ordered a number of components to to build our product, and then inventory that at our facility in California, so that way it's available. So from a supply chain standpoint, we have had no impact on on actually having the product that is needed for both public safety and cellular. So that's so the answer to your first question is we're fortunate that we saw this, and we took the appropriate action to ensure that we could inventory enough product in California.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I noticed that some people are sending us questions in chat, and I haven't been seeing those. So the Q&A will make sure that your questions get answered. Thank you for that. There are some good questions that are out there.
Hey, John, if you'd like, I can address your second question if you'd like.
Yes, go ahead.
So one area that we have seen a big uptick in is projects like, say, in school districts, right? I mean, a lot of these schools during this pandemic, there's been no one in the schools, so normal install time is when the kids and teachers and faculty and staff are not present. But given the pandemic, with a lot of schools not being in session, we've seen certainly a very large uptick in construction and putting systems in place for emergency responders within school districts all over the country.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So let's move on to the last question. This has to do with expanding the scope beyond the conversation around in-building public safety booster systems, or LMR repeaters, to considering the role that commercial mobile service plays in the end-to-end need for the safety of the public, starting with the ability to call 911 and extending to the fact that first responders are now using these services. You've got FirstNet, Verizon, T-Mobile has announced a new program. Dennis, talk to us a little bit about the role that commercial cellular plays in the public safety discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, John. So no, it's critical, right? You know, you have both a cellular element here as well as the the public safety first responder element. When you look at the fact that 80% of your 911 calls are being generated from a cell phone today, and then 65% of those are being generated from a cell phone within a building. You really need to make sure that you have not just good emergency responder coverage, but also good cellular coverage, because you know that there's a large percentage of individuals that are making those 911 calls that are coming from within that building. And one thing I do want to point out is that today, although we're talking a lot about fire and we're talking a lot about first responder systems, just realize that it also includes EMS and law enforcement, right? Because when you look at the number of calls that are being generated for 911, about 70% of those today are specifically, for law enforcement. So it's, I mean, it's definitely, something that's extremely important, looking at both cellular and the public safety element when it comes to making our buildings safer.
Thank you.
One thing, John, I would just add very quickly to that is when we got a lot of integrators on this, and then we've seen a lot of, just with COVID and everything that's happened, you got first responders, you got critical workers out there in state and local government buildings that many of you walk into those things, it's like a crypt. There's usually no service in there. And so, going in and talking to them about public safety is one thing, but also showing, how they can leverage that public safety build and have some efficiencies on a commercial build. They're seeing a big need for it right now. And so we've seen that. And then, with the great programs that T-Mobile has going right now, I think it's absolutely something out there to be looked into.
Thank you. Kern, you have some thoughts around this topic?
Right. So, and yes, the public safety requirement for coverage for the first responders is critical so they can do their job once they get there, but who calls them? So that's what we've been talking about is the guy dialing 911. And to that point, we've actually been in some of our training sessions where we've had insurance adjusters in there, or not adjusters, but insurance companies in there. We're starting to take notice. And in speaking with them after the meetings, they're beginning to look at the commercial side of cellular as being that failover system or even primary system in a lot of new buildings, especially in flex space buildings. So we are looking now at being able to turn what is I've got to spend money on a public safety system into I want to spend money on an integrated system that allows both the use of commercial cellular for my tenants, as well as things like CBRS and other connected services with IoT and so forth. So as Gabe said, leveraging that dollar into what could be revenue protection, revenue generation, as well as providing all those safety elements and maybe even lowering your insurance bill.
So questions are coming in like, what are the source of the 911 call statistics? These are available. You can Google and find these. Derek, go ahead and send me a note and I'll link them for you. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I can give you those. But they come mostly from an organization called NENA, N-E-N-A. So if you were to Google 911 statistics in NENA, you can get the answers from them. Also from CTIA is the other place that you can get those. So we are coming up right at the end of our hour here. We are right at the top of the hour. Let's see. I think we've covered everything. So I want to hand it back to Siri here.
Sure.
and ask, first of all, how much longer can we go if there are more questions to get to?
Yeah, I see a lot of questions that came in. I think we had more than 20 questions, and I think we were able to answer about 2/3 of those questions, and all the ones that we couldn't answer, I'll make sure that I provide those questions to the panelists, which they will reach out to you offline. All the recorded session from today will be sent out to all attendees. So if you, I think I got some questions about, sending a copy of the presentation, but I think it's a recording session would be more helpful for this particular webinar. So I think that concludes today's session. If you need contact info of the panelists, feel free to contact us, marketing@adrftech.com. And then I'll provide you the panelist contact information. Otherwise, I think this will conclude today's webinar. And thank you, all the panelists and John, for helping us answer all these questions that everyone was interested in. So thank you, everyone, and hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Everybody stay safe.
Mhm.
Good job, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It looks like Dennis and Kern dropped off, but I hope we got to everybody sufficiently. I think there's a lot of good opportunity for follow-up.